Hello, everyone. It's such a deep and personal joy to be here with you today for Global Neurodiversity Pride Day. Whether you're joining from across the world or from right next door, I want to welcome you into this space with open arms and an open heart. I know for many of us, showing up authentically can be a radical act, so thank you for being here, just as you are. Today, I want to invite you on a journey with me. A journey into self-understanding, unmasking, and belonging. This talk isn't just about diagnosis or identity. It's about what it means to stop performing and start becoming. It's about choosing pride over perfectionism, truth over assimilation, and connection over silence. Together, we'll explore what it means to discover your neurodivergence later in life, the role of language, identity, and community in healing, how we build lives and spaces that are truly neuroaffirming, and how writing became my way home to myself. This is not just my story, it's our story, because so many of us have traveled similar roads, quietly, courageously, and often alone. I hope that something in these words reflects your own experience back to you with clarity and compassion. So take a deep breath, let yourself settle. You don't have to mask here. You don't have to brace. Just be. This is a space for you. Let's begin. Hello, everyone. It's such a deep honor to be here with you today as part of Neurodiversity Pride Day. I want to thank the Neurodiversity Foundation for this invitation and for creating a space where neurodivergent joy, truth, and community are not only welcomed, but celebrated. It means the world to be included in this global gathering of voices. My name is Bridgette Hamstead. I'm a neurodivergent writer, speaker, consultant, and the founding director of Fish in a Tree, a virtual neurodiversity community center based in New Orleans. I'm also autistic and ADHD, or ADHD as many of us say. And I didn't come to understand that until I was well into my 30s. I'm a proud, late discovered neurodivergent woman, and that shapes everything about the work I do and the way I move through the world now. I'm also a mother to neurodivergent children, a partner, an advocate, and a community builder. But more than anything, I am someone who found freedom when I finally stopped trying to be someone I was never meant to be. I'll be speaking for about 20 minutes, and you're welcome to stem, fidget, stretch, move around, or take a break anytime. Today, I'll be sharing how I came to understand my own neurodivergence, how it changed my life, and how it led me to create a space for others like me. I want to start by bringing you into a moment. It's early morning in New Orleans, where I live, and the light hasn't quite made up its mind. The sky's a soft gray outside my 100-year-old window. My feet are bare on the warm wooden floor. The house is quiet. I'm sitting in my red velvet chair, mug in hand, trying to put words to something I once didn't have language for at all. This is when I feel most like myself. But for a long time, I didn't know what that meant, myself. I knew how to perform. I knew how to anticipate what people wanted from me. I knew how to keep my tone even and my face pleasant and my hands still. I knew how to make other people comfortable, but I didn't know how to be comfortable in my own skin. I spent years trying to understand why I always felt like an outsider, why everything seemed to take more energy, why the world felt so loud and bright and demanding, why I felt so deeply and so often, why I could never seem to get it right, no matter how hard I tried. And I tried. For decades, I tried. But I didn't know I was neurodivergent. I didn't know that the things I thought were personal failures were actually differences. I didn't know that the exhaustion I carried wasn't laziness or weakness. It was the cost of masking, of blending, of surviving in a world that didn't see me clearly. When I finally discovered that I was autistic and ADHD, it wasn't a dramatic moment. It was quiet, gentle, like a door cracking open in a dark room. It was a return to something I had always known, but had never been allowed to believe. I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt found. That's the story I want to share with you today. Not a story of pain or diagnosis, but a story of coming home to myself. A story of what it means to live unapologetically neurodivergent. A story of identity, language, and community. A story about what happens when we stop asking if we're too much and start asking what we were meant to be all along. And it starts like so many things do, with naming. I was in my mid-30s when I finally discovered that I was autistic. Not through a formal evaluation, although those can be very powerful and validating. I discovered it in the way many of us do. I read, I listened, and I found the words of other late diagnosed women, and they sounded like my own thoughts. I began to put the pieces together, and for the first time in my life, the puzzle wasn't missing half its corners. It fit, and it made sense. I remember sitting alone in my kitchen, laptop open, reading yet another article written by an autistic woman, describing a life that looked eerily like mine. I remember my breath caught in my chest. I remember the sound of the air conditioner kicking on. I remember the taste of salt on my tongue. I didn't know I had started crying. The realization wasn't just intellectual, it was cellular. It was something in me loosening that had been found too tight for too long. This wasn't just insight, it was liberation. It didn't erase the past, it didn't undo the harm, but it gave me context. It gave me language, it gave me community, and above all, it gave me permission to begin again, this time as myself. Once I stopped trying to live by someone else's blueprint, things began to shift. Not all at once. It wasn't like flipping a light switch. It was more like the sun rising, slow and soft, changing the way everything looked without me realizing it at first. But over time, the changes became impossible to ignore. The old ways of living no longer fit. The old rules no longer applied. I had spent so much of my life trying to be what I thought I was supposed to be: a good daughter, a good student, a good wife, a good employee, quiet, composed, capable, polished. Every role came with expectations, and I took them seriously. I thought if I could do everything right, I would feel safe. I thought if I performed well enough, I would be accepted. But no matter how hard I tried, it never felt like enough. There was always something just out of reach, always another standard I hadn't quite met. And then, when I realized I was autistic and ADHD, I stopped asking how to be better. I started asking how to be real. I began peeling back the layers of performance that had kept me afloat, but also kept me disconnected from myself. I had to relearn how to listen to my body, how to notice what it was telling me without judgment, how to let go of shame, how to trust the way I processed the world was not defective, just different. In that space, in that quiet, raw, honest space, I found something I didn't know I was looking for. I found other people like me. I wasn't the only one who had been late diagnosed. I wasn't the only one who had lived decades without language. I wasn't the only one who had masked her way through school and relationships and jobs, only to burn out again and again and wonder why. That realization changed everything. I, I founded Fish in a Tree because I needed a space that didn't exist. I needed a place where neurodivergent people could show up as themselves without having to justify or explain or minimize who they were. I wanted to build what I never had: community, connection, and affirmation rooted in the social model of disability. A space where support didn't mean fixing, where access wasn't a favor, and where people could be witnessed in their wholeness. At first, it was small, a group of women on Zoom talking about what it meant to realize, often suddenly, often painfully, that the story we'd been told about ourselves was incomplete, that we weren't too sensitive or too dramatic or too disorganized. We were autistic. We were ADHD. We were both. We were late diagnosed. We were self-identified, and we were real. And we were finally starting to believe it. Those conversations were sacred, not because they were formal or polished, but because they were honest. I watched women unmask in real time. I watched them soften into themselves. I watched them name grief they didn't know they were carrying, and I watched them remember joy. And I saw myself in all of them. Pride began to show up, not in what I said about myself publicly, but in the choices I made privately. It showed up in the boundaries I started setting, in the routines I created to support my brain, not to punish it, in the sensory adjustments I made in my home, my clothing, my work environment, in the way I began narrating my life to myself with compassion instead of shame. It showed up in how I began to write. Writing has always been the way I understand myself. It's how I process what I feel, how I connect the dots, and how I hold space for things that are complicated and unresolved. When I started writing about my neurodivergence, about masking, misdiagnosis, burnout, parenting, estrangement, workplace trauma, I wasn't writing for visibility. I was writing because I needed to make sense of what had happened to me. I needed to claim a narrative that had been written over by other people for far too long. But something powerful happened when I started sharing that writing. Other people began to see themselves in it. People who had been wondering if they too were autistic. People who had always felt different but never had the language to explain it. People who had been dismissed, pathologized, underestimated, or ignored. People who were just beginning to question what they'd been told about themselves their entire lives. I began to receive messages, dozens, then hundreds, from women and non-binary people saying, "I thought I was the only one," or "This helped me understand myself," or "I cried reading this." That's when I realized this wasn't just about me, this was about us. Writing didn't just help me process, it helped me reclaim. In putting my truth on paper, I was giving myself back the narrative I'd lost in years of performance. And I realized that pride isn't just about self-celebration, it's about connection, truth-telling, and breaking the silence. Not for the sake of visibility, but for the sake of community. That's the thing about community. It doesn't just make you feel supported, it makes you feel seen. It mirrors back the parts of you that the world has tried to erase. It reminds you that you are not imagining it, that you are not overreacting, and that you are not alone. It reminds me that your way of being is the world is not a problem to be solved. It is a perspective, a rhythm, a way of moving through life that is just as valid, just as meaningful, and just as beautiful as any other. Fish in a Tree grew because the need was there, because people were hungry for connection that wasn't transactional, for belonging that wasn't conditional, for space that honored neurodivergent lives as worthy, not in spite of our differences, but because of them. And I grew alongside it. In my work, in my relationships, in my home, I started showing up more fully. I stopped trying to look neurotypical. I stopped pretending I was fine when I wasn't. I started asking for what I needed: clear communication, dim lights, breaks between meetings, flexible deadlines, and the ability to work from home. I started letting my life take the shape of my nervous system, instead of trying to squeeze my nervous system into the shape of a life that wasn't meant for me. And for the first time, I started to thrive. Pride for me didn't come as a loud declaration at first. It wasn't a parade or a post or a slogan. It was quieter than that. It was the moment I sat in my kitchen table and didn't brace for the crash. It was the moment I let my hands flap when I was excited and didn't stop them. It was the first time I said to someone, "I'm autistic," and didn't follow it with an apology. It was walking into a room and deciding that I didn't need to contort myself to fit in, that I could speak in the rhythm that feels right to me, that I could pause when I needed to, that I could bring all of me, not just the version I thought they'd find acceptable. That is pride, and it is a practice. It's not a single day. It's not a linear journey. It's a series of choices, small, daily, radical choices to be real, to be whole, to be seen. Some days those choices feel easy. Some days they feel impossible. But every day I make them, I get a little closer to the life I was meant to live. And yes, sometimes pride is loud. Sometimes it's the moment you walk into a room full of neurodivergent people and realize there's nothing you have to explain. Sometimes it's the moment your child says, "I think my brain is like yours," and it feels like the most beautiful thing you have ever heard. Sometimes it's watching someone you love unmask in front of you and realizing they feel safe. Pride is the softness that comes when the mask drops and you're still loved. It's the friend who notices that you're overstimulated and offers you noise-canceling headphones without making it weird. It's the partner who reads your writing and says, "This is who you are," and means it. It's the colleague who hears you say, "I need some extra time," and responds, "Of course, how can I help?" It's the quiet joy of being known. Pride is also resistance, not in a combative way, but in a steady, grounded way. It's saying, "I deserve to exist in this world as I am. I deserve space, support, dignity, and joy. I deserve to stop hiding. I deserve to unlearn shame, and I deserve to take up room in my own life." If you're listening today and you're just beginning to explore your neurodivergence, if the world still feels new in your mouth, if you're not sure where you fit, if you're wondering if you belong here, I want you to know something. You do. You don't need a diagnosis to be valid. You don't need approval to be real. You don't need to have it all figured out to take pride in who you are. You are not too much. You are not too late. And you are not alone. You are part of something bigger than yourself. You are part of a community that is rewriting the narrative, a community that is shifting what it means to be autistic, ADHD, ADHD, or neurodivergent, a community that is building a world that makes room for all of us. That's what this day is about. It's about connection, celebration. It's about honoring the beauty of our minds, our experiences, and our truths. It's about lifting each other up, not because we've overcome, but because we've arrived. We're here and we're not hiding anymore. As I close, I want to return to that image I began with, because it reminds me of what has shifted. It's early morning in my old Creole double shotgun house, the kind that breathes history through its floorboards. The walls are painted seafoam green, softened by the amber glow of a lamp that's been burning since before dawn. Light filters through the tall window beside my desk, brushing against stacks of paper, a worn notebook, a half-full mug cooling beside my laptop, my red velvet squashy armchair. The air is still, except for the distant hum of the streetcar and the gentle creak of wood settling. This is not just my routine. This is my reclamation. For years, I didn't know what I needed. I didn't believe I was allowed to need anything. Now I build my life around the sensory truths I used to ignore. This quiet, this light, this space, it's essential, and it's mine. Discovering I was autistic and ADHD didn't give me a new identity. It gave me a clearer understanding of the one I had always carried. It helped me put language to the disconnect, the overwhelm, the perfectionism, the pattern of burning out and blaming myself. But it also helped me recognize my strengths, not just in theory, but in practice. Pattern recognition, intuition, emotional insight, an ability to see what's missing in a system and imagine something better. Those aren't footnotes, they're foundations. The story I've been telling today isn't about diagnosis or revelation. It's about what happens when we begin living in alignment with who we actually are, instead of who we were told to be. It's about how things start to shift when we stop filtering ourselves through someone else's expectations. And more importantly, it's about what becomes possible when we're not doing that alone. Community has been at the center of everything that's changed my life, not just because of shared identity, but because of shared insight, because there is something profoundly healing about being with people who don't need an explanation. It's in those spaces, honest, affirming, neurodivergent spaces, that I've seen the most transformation. That's why I built Fish in a Tree. That's why I keep showing up for this work, because I know what it feels like to live without community, and I know what becomes possible when we have it. Pride to me isn't a performance. It's not about saying everything is easy or joyful or fixed. It's about recognizing that even in the complexity, even in the mess of unlearning and rebuilding, there's something worth celebrating. There's truth, there's self-recognition, and there's freedom in no longer needing to hide. And I do celebrate. I celebrate the woman I am now, who no longer thinks her differences make her less valuable. I celebrate the people I've met through this work, who've reminded me every day that neurodivergence is not something to survive. It's something to understand, support, and in many ways to honor. If you're still on the edge of that discovery, if you're still putting the pieces together or wondering if any of this applies to you, I want you to know that there is space for you here. Your timeline is valid, your insight is real, and you don't need to perform certainty in order to belong. You already do. Thank you for letting me share this with you and for being part of a community where pride is lived, not just proclaimed. I'm grateful to be here, and I hope we continue building this future together. Happy Neurodiversity Pride Day.